In the first part of this practical, 5 integrated circuits were tested with the same pin setup. 2 inputs connected to push button 1 and push button 2 and 1 output enabled us to fill out the truth tables for each IC and find out which gate we have been using. Looking at the NAND gate table, it is evident that we only get a false value when both buttons are pushed. And because NAND gates' behaviors are the opposite to AND gates, we know for sure that the AND gate table tells us the truth when it says you only get a true value when both buttons are pushed. The OR gate table shows us that either or both A and B are true. The answer is true. However, XOR says only if exclusively A or B is true. The answer is true. On the contrary, XNOR comes along and says only if A or B are exclusively not true. The answer is true. For the second part, same parts were used as in part 1, except we used 2 IC744 that only had 1 input and 1 output, and 742 with 2 inputs and 1 output. These IC's truth tables were filled, and for the first IC mentioned, it read a NOT gate, that is when the input is positive and the outcome is negative, and for the other one a NOR gate, that is when the input is negative and the outcome is positive. The perfect yin-yang. For the third part, same processes 1 and 2 were used, except now only ICs can include NOR gates and then NAND gates. For the NOR gate, we can add the NOT function, an inverter, to the output of the NOR gate and then create an OR function. And then by inverting the outputs of the NOR gates, we get an AND gate. The same can be seen for the NAND gate. In the second part of this practical, we first built a half adder and a half subtractor. Half adder is a combinational arithmetic circuit that adds 2 binary digits A and B and has 2 outputs, sum and carry. Sum being the XOR of A and B and carry being the AND. The carry signal represents an overflow into the next digit of multi-digit addition. For the half subtractor, same parts were used as for the half adder, but a NOT IC was added to the circuit. Half subtractor is used to subtract 1 binary digit from another. 2 inputs, a minuend and a subtrahend, give the outputs difference and borrow out. Difference being the XOR gate and borrow being the AND with an added input. The borrow out signal is set when the subtractor needs to borrow from the next digit in a multi-digit subtraction. Next, an SR latch was built, which is the most basic type of flip-flops. Unlike combinational logic circuits that change state depending upon the signals to their inputs at a time, sequential logic circuits like SR have some form of memory built in. The circuit had 2 inputs, set and reset, and then 2 outputs, Q connected to set and Q prime connected to reset. When a circuit connects to power, there is no way of knowing if it starts in set state or reset. And then when you turn a set and reset a real device at the same time, a kind of toggle will exist due to the flip-flop loses control over Q and Q prime that should be inverses of each other. Next, we built a JK flip-flop. The main difference between a JK flip-flop and an SR latch is that in the JK flip-flop, both inputs can be high. When both J and K inputs are high, the Q output alternates between high and low. Thereby, the invalid condition which occurs in the SR latch is eliminated. Here we can see that the current flows through both inputs. There is a light on both J, the red one, and K, the green one. And also there is a light on Q prime, which is the blue light. And when pressing the push button, it switches between Q prime. In this video, K is grounded. Therefore, there is only light on J, the red one. For starters, Q prime is turned on. Then when pressing the push button, nothing happens. In this video, J is grounded. Therefore, there is only light on K, the green one. Q prime, the blue light, is on, but then the push button is pressed and the yellow light turns on, which is Q. Therefore, we have reset the circuit. Now both J and K are grounded, and when the current flows through, only the yellow light turns on. Pressing the push button doesn't change anything because here we have a hold state. When the outputs from 1 to 8 are used, there will be a high flow on the first LED in the beginning. There is one button that is kind of a turn-off button. When it is pressed, all the LEDs will be off, but when it is pressed with any other button, it helps to control the shift. By pressing on more push buttons at a time, the flow can be controlled and sent to different LEDs. If the resistors are connected to the ground, all the LEDs will have a high flow running through them, and therefore they will all light up, as you can see here in the picture. If they are connected to VCC, the flow can be controlled by pressing the push buttons. The button hold it down, we can stop the count. As seen here in the video, it stops at the same number as it was at when we pushed. If we just press on the push button without holding it down, it stops for 1 clock pulse and then continues. If the push button is connected to input 15 on the IC and we push the button and hold it down, we restart the count. It goes to 0. If we just push it without holding it down, it goes to 0 for 1 clock pulse and then starts again from 0 to 9. Switching the capacitors from a smaller to bigger gives a different kind of speed. The smaller the capacitor is, the faster the count gets, and vice versa. When the push button is disconnected from the circuit, the count goes continuously on without stopping. When the push button is pressed once really fast, nothing happens because there is still a low flow on all the LEDs and a high flow is on the push button. But when the push button is held down for 1 clock pulse, the high flow shifts to the first LED. Then after 1 clock pulse, the higher flow goes to the next one and the first one will have a low flow and therefore no light. This goes on until it reaches the last LED. That is, at the end, all the LEDs will have a low flow. This gives, as seen in the video, that the first LED will light up for 1 clock pulse and then shift to the next one and so on. When the push button is held down for 2 clock pulses, the first LED will shift to high flow on the first pulse and also have a high flow on the second pulse. The second LED will shift to a high flow on the second pulse and stays like that for 2 pulses before it shifts to low flow. Therefore, as seen in the video, there will be 2 LEDs on at each clock pulse until it stops on the last one. Each LED will have high flow for 2 pulses until it switches to low flow. When the push button is held down for 4 pulses, the first LED will shift to high flow on the first pulse, the second LED will shift to high flow on the second pulse, the third one on the third, and the fourth on the fourth. They all stay on with a high flow for 4 clock pulses each until they switch back to low. The video shows how they shift back and forth until they all have low flow. Finally, when the push button is held down for 2 pulses, released from 1 pulse and then pushed again for 1 pulse, the LEDs will shift from high to low flow back and forth like you can see in the video.